You are sitting behind a custom-milled white oak desk on the 9th floor of a newly glass-clad office park in Charlotte, North Carolina. In your hands is a blue leather binder containing a newly approved commercial banking charter from the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. Your initial capital stands at exactly $50 million wired from your private equity sponsors into a Federal Reserve clearing account. On paper, you are now the president and majority shareholder of a state-chartered commercial bank. It seems like the ultimate wealth generator. You gather deposits from retail savers at a low interest rate, package those funds, and lend them to local commercial real estate developers at a premium. The spread is your profit. The math feels clean, predictable, and virtually risk-free. But as the automatic double doors of your flagship branch slide open on Monday morning at 8:59 a.m., the actual mechanics of the financial system begin to dismantle this assumption. The pristine marble lobby is not a store of wealth. It is a theatrical stage. The business you are running is not a secured warehouse for cash. It is a highly leveraged statistical bet on human behavior and short-term liquidity. Once you peel back the limestone facade, you realize that you do not own the money in your vault. You are merely renting it from people who can ask for it back at any second. Before your first customer walks in, you must choose your ecosystem. A retail bank requires expensive physical footprints, branches, drive-thrus, and automated teller machines. A pure commercial bank requires highly compensated relationship managers who spend months wining and dining corporate executives to secure mid-market business loans. A digital-only neobank requires no branches but demands a customer acquisition cost that often exceeds the lifetime value of the deposits they bring in. You opt for a mid-market commercial and retail hybrid. Before you take your first deposit, your $50 million in capital is already being hollowed out by expenses that never show up in high-level business plans. You do not spend your capital on gold bars or heavy vault doors. Your largest initial capital expenditure is the core banking software. You sign an 84-month contract with a major financial technology provider like FIS or Jack Henry. The integration fee is a flat $1,800,000. The monthly licensing and data processing fees cost you $120,000, regardless of whether you have 10 depositors or 10,000. Next is the regulatory moat. You cannot operate without a direct connection to the Federal Reserve's FedWire and FedH payment rails. Setting up these dedicated lines, along with the hardware security modules required to encrypt trans-bank transactions, costs $450,000 in upfront installation and security auditing. Then comes the compliance department. Under Title 31 of the Bank Secrecy Act and the USA Patriot Act, you are personally liable for any money laundering that occurs through your institution. You hire a Chief BSA AML officer. Her starting salary is $215,000 plus a guaranteed annual bonus. She demands a specialized software package to scan every deposit, wire, and ACH transfer for suspicious patterns. That software costs $85,000 annually. Finally, there is the capital buffer. Under the Basel III international framework and domestic regulatory guidelines, you must maintain a Tier 1 leverage ratio of at least 8% to be considered well capitalized. This means $4 million of your $50 million startup capital must sit entirely idle in a non-interest-bearing account at the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. You cannot lend it. You cannot spend it on marketing. It is dead capital, existing solely to absorb future loan losses before they reach your depositors. Your starting runway is already shrinking, and you have not yet booked a single dollar of interest income. Your depositors are not your customers in the traditional sense. They are your lenders. You are borrowing money from them, and they fall into two distinct psychological profiles. You observe depositor A. He is a high-volume retail customer. He keeps an average balance of $1,400 in his checking account. Every month, he receives a direct deposit, pays 15 bills online, uses your ATM 4 times, and occasionally calls your customer service line to complain about a monthly service fee. To maintain his account, your core banking system runs transactions, your teller handles physical cash, and your customer service representatives spend valuable time. When you calculate the infrastructure, labor, and card issuance costs, depositor A costs your bank roughly $180 a year to maintain. Since his balance is low, the interest you can generate by lending his $1,400 at current market rates is less than $95. From a pure unit economic perspective, your average retail depositor is a loss leader. Now you observe depositor B. This is a local mid-sized manufacturing company. They maintain an operating account with an average balance of $4,500,000. They rarely call. Their accounting department interacts with your systems solely through automated batch. ACH uploads twice a month for payroll. You pay them a negotiated commercial interest rate of 1.1%. This single corporate client provides the raw material for your entire lending operation. You take that $4.5 million, keep a sliver in reserves, and package the rest into a $4 million commercial mortgage for a local medical plaza at 6.85%. This is where your net interest margin is born. But this exposes the fundamental structural paradox of banking, the mismatch of duration and liquidity. Your assets, the $4 million commercial mortgage, are locked up for 15 years. Your liabilities, depositor B's $4.5 million, can be withdrawn via a single mouse click at any point during business hours. Your entire business model relies on a statistical illusion. You bet that depositor B and thousands of others like them will never want their money back at the exact same time. In reality, your vault contains less than 2% of the actual deposits listed on your digital balance sheet. The rest exists only as legal promises written on digital ledger paper. To prevent this statistical illusion from shattering, you must master the psychology of stability. This is why the architecture of your bank branch is meticulously engineered. It is not accidental that your flagship branch features solid granite columns, heavy oak trim, and a floor-to-ceiling vault door visible from the lobby. The vault door is mostly decorative. Modern security relies on silent, digital access controls and off-site monitoring. But a vault door that weighs 6 tons conveys a primitive message to the human brain. Your money is solid, cold, heavy, and permanent. You are buying confidence. If a customer believes their money is safe, they do not ask for it. If they do not ask for it, the illusion remains true. At the same time, your digital and operational workflows are designed with deliberate asymmetrical friction. You make it frictionless to deposit money. A customer can snap a photo of a check on their smartphone and the balance appears in their account instantly. But when a customer wants to withdraw a substantial sum, you activate defensive friction protocols. If a commercial client requests an external wire transfer of $800,000, they do not simply click send. The system triggers a multi-factor authentication check. Then, a security delay holds the transaction for fraud prevention. A relationship manager is prompted to call the client to verify the payment instructions. This is presented as high-level security for the client's protection. In reality, it is a critical liquidity management tool. By delaying the outflow of funds by even 4 hours, you give your Treasury desk time to manage your daily settlement position with the Federal Reserve. If a retail customer walks into a branch and asks for $25,000 in physical cash, your branch manager politely informs them that the branch only holds a limited cash drawer for safety reasons. "We need to order that currency from our armored car service," the manager says. "It will be here on Thursday." This is not a supply chain failure. It is a regulatory and psychological buffer designed to break the momentum of panic. Every second of friction you insert into the withdrawal process is a shield protecting your net interest margin. When this confidence breaks, the collapse is not a slow decline. It is an instantaneous, non-linear event. You do not need to theorize this. You have the complete historical post-mortem of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, resting on your desk as a warning. You trace their exact steps from 2020 to 2023. During the venture capital boom of 2020 and 2021, SVB's deposits ballooned from $61 billion to $189 billion. Tech startups, flush with venture capital cash, parked millions in non-interest-bearing operating accounts. SVB's management faced a critical problem. They had too much liquidity and too little loan demand to absorb it. To generate yield, they purchased $91 billion of long-term, fixed-rate residential mortgage-backed securities, MBS, backed by government agencies. These securities yielded an average rate of 1.56%. They locked this cash into securities with an average duration of over 10 years. Then, the macroeconomic landscape shifted. Throughout 2022 and early 2023, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates from near zero to 4.5%. Because newly issued bonds were now paying over 5%, the market value of SVB's older 1.56% securities crashed. By late 2022, SVB's balance sheet carried a massive, unrecognized, unrealized loss of over $15 billion in its held-to-maturity HTM portfolio. This paper loss was so large, it practically matched the bank's entire total equity buffer of $16.2 billion. You look at the calendar entry for Wednesday, the 8th of March, 2023, to fund a steady stream of customer withdrawals as venture capital funding dried up. SVB was forced to liquidate $21 billion of its available-for-sale AFS securities. This sale forced them to recognize a realized loss of $1.8 billion after taxes. Simultaneously, they announced an emergency plan to raise $2.25 billion in new capital to plug the hole. The announcement triggered immediate panic. On Thursday, the 9th of March 2023, venture capitalists, including Peter Thiel's Founders Fund and Coatue Management, instructed their portfolio companies to pull their deposits. Because SVB's customer base was highly concentrated and digitally hyper-connected on private messaging platforms, the panic spread instantly. By 4 p.m. on March 9, depositors had initiated wire requests to withdraw $42 billion in a single 10-hour business day. The digital run moved at a rate of over $1 million per second. SVB's account at the Federal Reserve went into a massive deficit because they could not liquidate their remaining HTM securities fast enough without suffering catastrophic losses. The next morning, Friday, the 10th of March 2023, before the West Coast branches could even unlock their doors, California state regulators and the FDIC stepped in, declared SVB insolvent, and seized control of its operations. It was the second largest bank failure in United States history, triggered not by bad credit or high default rates, but by a pure duration mismatch and a digital liquidity run. To understand how thin your own survival margins are, you must look at your actual end-of-year ledger under normal conditions. Total assets, $400 million. Total liabilities, $360 million. Shareholder equity, $40 million. Net interest income, $9,160,000. Now you subtract your operating expenses, $9,250,000. Your net operating income is negative $90,000. To survive, you cannot rely solely on the margin between deposits and loans. You must find a secondary revenue engine. This is why you charge a 3% interchange fee every time a retail customer swipes their business debit card. This is why you charge $35 wire transfer fees, $150 monthly cash management fees, and $250 document preparation fees for commercial loan applications. These non-interest fee incomes are what keep your bank profitable when the yield curve flattens and your net interest margin shrinks. The math of running a bank is a game of fractional tolerances. If your loan default rate, your non-performing assets, increases from a historical average of 0.6% to just 1.8%, your entire profit margin evaporates. If your deposit churn rate increases by 2.2%, you are forced to replace cheap retail deposits with high-cost Federal Home Loan Bank advances, turning your profitable loans into money-losing liabilities. You are operating a business where you are constantly leveraged 10-to-1, borrowing short-term confidence to purchase long-term promises. It is a machine built on the assumption of collective inaction. So, if you decide to take your capital and build your own bank, do not look at the busy tellers or the high net worth clients shaking hands in the lobby as your source of strength. The success of your enterprise does not rest on the active, demanding customers who constantly monitor interest rates and move their funds for an extra 10 basis points. It rests on the silent majority. It rests on the thousands of forgotten checking accounts, the lazy corporate balances, and the people who trust the heavy marble steps enough to leave their money completely undisturbed. You are not capitalizing on financial activity. You are surviving on financial inertia.